Asgard's Wrath 2. How good is it really? And should you play it? Let's dive right into it. Asgard's Wrath 2 is an open-world VR game that takes the RPG experience to the next level. But first and foremost, it is important to know that this game is a meta exclusive. That means you can only play it on a Quest 2, Quest 3, or Quest Pro. And while your experience might slightly differ depending on the headset that you use, we will go into more detail about those changes later on in this review. But let's start with the overall story of this insanely ambitious game. Because as the title implies, Asgard's Wrath 2 is a sequel to the original VR game that came out on the Rift platform. That means it was only possible to play it by being tethered up to a computer or a buff laptop. And while luckily this is now not necessary any longer, you also do not need to play the previous game before you get into this one. Because Asgard's Wrath 2 has a built-in prologue that basically offers a perfect summary of everything that has happened so far. And without spoiling the story, the original title was mostly focused on Norse mythology, where you as the player have gotten in some huge trouble with none other than Loki, but where they now shifted the story completely to Egyptian mythology instead, which is overall a very welcome look that keeps the narrative very fresh, because narrative and story are a big chunk of this game, especially with its huge RPG focus. It is sure that for anybody who is looking for some great story that goes much deeper than just touching the surface, that you would sure find your fill here. But maybe the most important part we have to talk about is of course the gameplay. Since besides the open world and your big exploration and adventure segments, Asgard's Wrath 2 is largely designed for some amazing combat, which you will be making use of a lot. And that is why it is so great that there are plenty of mechanics that make this as engaging as possible. While you will start out with your first character that is wielding a simple sword and shield, you will later on embody different so-called mortals, with each their own unique weapons, strategy, and abilities. And thanks to this constant evolution and introduction of new characters, you have to change your way around the battlefield quite often. And these kind of things make sure that Asgard's Wrath 2 never feels dull throughout the entire game, since you are constantly thinking about new ways to approach a problem without it feeling like you're overflowing with options. With the only downside is that, like with any other sword-based gameplay, it is not yet possible to feel the impact when you clash with your enemies. And while most gamers are completely used to this if they have played some VR games before, it is for those that are new to VR that this experience might feel kind of counterintuitive. Luckily, the developers kept this in mind and made sure that all weapons can also be thrown or used in a different mode, like shooting projectiles, to kind of work around this problem altogether. And to top it off, they also included some must-needed features in combat, like the use of enemy weak points for extra damage, as well as being able to counterattack after a good block. There's even an extensive skill tree that lets you tailor your combat style towards certain actions or weapons. But after countless hours of gameplay, the general encounters can start to become quite repetitive. Although, thanks to the amazing big boss battles, it always feels refreshing enough and not like you have to grind through the levels. But combat is only one part of the gameplay, with the other one being the many dungeons and puzzles that you will have to solve during your missions. This can be from anything simple, like retrieving an item or getting from point A to B while avoiding certain obstacles. But these puzzles often involve you using your weapons outside of combat to be able to affect the environment and reach the end goal of a certain challenge. From using a grapple ability to time sequencing, it kind of gives up a vibe from the shrines of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. But without once again avoiding spoilers, they also often have unique twists to them, like using mixed reality or turning yourself into a huge god to look down on the environment from below. But that does mean that this game can get quite intense, because next to the smooth locomotion that you'll be using with your thumbstick, there will also be some automatic movements such as running, sliding, or grappling. And the game does offer some options to decrease the intensity of your movements, like the reduce of head shakes or other related effects. But if you are someone that often gets motion sick, then this is definitely something to keep in mind. But before we get to the most important part, a quick word from the company that made this video possible. If you feel like your screen in VR is too blurry, or if you sometimes wish that your graphics look just a bit sharper, then you might want to check out the lenses from the company named VRWave. Especially if you're also wearing glasses or contacts in real life, because they make lenses for VR headsets like the Quest 2 that you can just click in and directly start using, taking your VR experience quickly to the next level. They even make them for the new and upcoming headsets like the Quest 3 and the PlayStation VR 2. And you can use the code VRelity for a 5% discount on your total purchase. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link for you guys in the description below. And with that said, let's get right back into it. And that gets us to the scale and graphics. Because Asgard's Rev 2 is absolutely massive, which definitely means something when we're talking about VR games, because most titles are more like experiences that only last a couple hours at max. But this game takes a whole new approach to that, because the basic campaign will probably take you at least 60 hours to finish. And if you are a completionist that also wants to take on all these side missions or secret bosses, you'll be far over 90 hours in before you see the end credits. And that is exactly also the selling point of this huge open world RPG. Finally creating a true AAA game, and the looks, art design, as well as animations are also absolutely gorgeous and really come to life inside virtual reality. But while on launch, the Quest 2 as well as Quest 3 version were nearly identical. Those who own a Quest 3 now have a clear advantage, with higher refresh rates as well as the unlocked option of enhanced rendering, which clearly shows that the people behind it are trying to push the Quest 3 to its absolute limit. But keep in mind that this is still a standalone VR experience. So that means that some textures and environments won't look as detailed or crisp as Half-Life Alyx or Boneworks. Besides, there are also some noticeable pop-ins across the entire game, which means that objects just appear as you move closer towards them. And it is mostly forgivable, but seeing enemies or goats just pop in when you're a couple meters away from them does break the immersion in some parts of the game. But then again, these are just nitpicks on the overall fantastic graphics that they managed to pull off on such a large scale. But that gets us to the final conclusion. Asgard's Rev 2 is definitely one of the biggest and best open world VR games that you can play. Not only does it have a massive campaign with great combat and an amazing looking art style, it also has a deep narrative and big changes that keep you on your toes throughout the entire playthrough. But best of all, for most users who got a new VR headset, this game most likely came directly bundled with it. And if not, it would set you back $60. That honestly would be worth every single cent possible. Because Asgard's Rev 2 is by far the best open world RPG that you can get on a standalone VR headset. But that's not all. Because there are also some other must-play VR games that you just have to try out. So click on the video that you see on screen right now to make sure you don't miss out.